"You're going to have sex with us," said the three giant women already living on the farm he bought. David had always thought of himself as someone who liked adventure, but buying a farm in the middle of nowhere was a bigger adventure than he had ever imagined. He had grown up in the city, surrounded by concrete, traffic, and the constant hum of people moving somewhere. Farms, animals, wide open spaces, these were things he had only seen in pictures or movies. Yet here he was, standing at the edge of his new property, the early morning sun casting long shadows across the fields, and feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness he hadn't felt in years. The farm looked perfect from the outside. The house was large, old, but sturdy, with a wraparound porch that creaked slightly under his feet. The field stretched far beyond, dotted with patches of trees and a small pond glinting in the sun. It was everything he had dreamed of: freedom, open air, and a life far away from the noise of the city. That dream, however, began to wobble almost immediately. As David stepped down from his truck and stretched, taking in the morning air, he noticed movement near the barn. 3 figures were walking toward him. At first, he thought they might be neighbors, farmers, perhaps, curious about the new owner. But the closer they got, the more he realized these were no ordinary neighbors. They were tall. Very tall. Not in an unusual way like basketball players, but tall enough to make him step back unconsciously. Each of them carried themselves with an air of authority, and their eyes, sharp and observant, made him feel as though he was being measured from head to toe. Their clothes were simple, worn from farm life, but they had a confidence that made him feel small and out of place. "Hi there," David said, trying to sound friendly. "I'm David. I just bought this farm." The women stopped a few feet away and stared at him for a long moment. Then one of them, the tallest, spoke first. Her voice was deep and calm, but there was a certain force behind it that made David pause.
"You're the new owner, huh?" she said.
"I'm Margaret. These are Ruth and Lila. We've been living here for a while." David blinked. Living here?" he repeated.
"On the farm?" Margaret smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yes."
"For years. You're not the first person to buy this place thinking it's empty." David laughed nervously. I didn't know anyone was living here. I thought it was abandoned." Ruth, slightly shorter than Margaret but just as imposing, crossed her arms. "Abandoned?" she said. "Not exactly. We like it quiet here."
"Keep to ourselves! At the land!"
Evers tilted his head. Rules? Lila, the smallest of the 3, stepped forward. She had a gentle smile, but there was something firm in the way she held herself. "Not laws," she said. "Just ways things get done around here."
"If you want to stay, you'll have to follow them." David swallowed.
He had expected some curious neighbors, maybe a handshake or a quick warning about trespassing. But this was something else entirely. Something that made his stomach tighten with a strange mix of fear and excitement. "Well," he said finally, trying to recover his composure, "I think I can manage that."
"I mean, I bought the farm. I want to take care of it."
Margaret's eyes softened slightly. "We'll see," she said. "Come inside. We'll talk." David followed them hesitantly toward the house. As they walked, he noticed how easily they moved through the uneven ground, how confident they seemed even on the roughest patches of the yard. Meanwhile, he stumbled over small rocks and roots, feeling clumsy in comparison, Inside, the house was warm and welcoming in a strange, lived-in way. Dust covered some shelves, but there was a certain charm to it. The smell of old wood, dried herbs hanging from the ceiling, and the faint hint of something cooking in the kitchen. The women gestured for him to sit, and he did, trying not to fidget.
Margaret poured some tea into simple cups and handed one to him. "We don't get many visitors," she said casually.
Most people see the property, decide it's too big or too strange, and leave. David nodded. Yeah, I can see that. It's different. But that's why I wanted it. Ruth leaned back in her chair, watching him carefully. Different can be good, she said, if you can handle it.
David raised an eyebrow. Handle it?
Handle. What? Margaret and Ruth exchanged a glance, as if silently agreeing on something. Then Margaret said, Life here isn't like life in the city. Things happen differently. People do things differently. David, you'll see soon enough.
Oh!
David wasn't sure what to make of that, but before he could ask another question, Lila spoke up. We can show you around. You should see the animals, the fields, and the barns. There's work to do, and it's easier if you know what you're dealing with. David nodded eagerly. Absolutely. I want to learn everything. As they walked through the farm, he realized that there was far more than he had expected. Chickens pecked at the ground near the barn. Goats wandered freely, and a few cows were grazing in the distance. The pond wasn't just a pond. It was home to ducks and geese. Paths wound through fields, and there were small gardens growing vegetables, all neatly organized. This is amazing, he said. Duh. You've done so much here. Margaret shrugged. It's what keeps us busy. The farm takes care of itself if you know how to manage it. If not, well, you end up learning fast. Narration. I guess I'll be learning fast then, Lila smiled. Don't worry, we'll guide you. But remember, it's not just the land. It's us, too. You have to get along with us if you want this to work. David felt a knot of nervousness in his stomach. He had imagined being a farm owner, but he hadn't imagined this. 3 giant, confident women who seemed to rule the place with quiet authority. They weren't threatening, but they were overwhelming. Every step he took, every word he spoke, seemed to be watched carefully. Still, as he looked around, he realized something important. There was warmth here, too. The women had lived in harmony with the land for years, and they clearly cared for it deeply. There was knowledge in the way they moved, in how they spoke about the animals and the crops. He had stumbled into a strange new world, but it was fascinating. The sun was climbing higher when they returned to the house. David was exhausted from walking, listening, and trying not to make mistakes. But yet he couldn't help but smile. This was the adventure he had been seeking, in all its unexpected and intimidating glory. As he sipped the last of his tea, he realized that life on the farm would be nothing like he had imagined. It would be bigger, wilder, and far more unpredictable. And somehow he felt ready for it, even if it meant learning the rules of 3 giant women who already called the farm home. By the time he left the house to explore his new fields again that afternoon, he was already imagining what life here could be like. The air smelled different, sharper, fresher than the city. The earth under his boots felt alive. And the 3 women? They were not just obstacles. They were teachers, guides, and perhaps eventually, friends. For the first time in years, David felt a thrill of possibility, mixed with a hint of nervousness. Life on the farm wasn't going to be easy. But then nothing worth doing ever was. David woke up the next morning to the soft light of the sun streaming through the windows. The air smelled of fresh earth and dew, a sharp contrast to the faint exhaust and smog he was used to in the city. For a moment he just lay in bed, listening to the distant clucking of chickens and the low mooing of cows. This was different, peaceful, and also slightly overwhelming. He dressed quickly and stepped outside. The women were already moving around the yard, performing tasks he hadn't even considered. Margaret was feeding the chickens, scattering corn in neat rows, while Ruth carried buckets of water to the goats. Lila was near the pond, tossing bits of bread to the ducks and geese. They all moved with efficiency and purpose, and David felt like he was suddenly standing in the middle of a well-rehearsed performance. "Good morning," he said sheepishly, trying to appear helpful. Margaret looked up.
Morning, she replied.
"You'll need to start learning fast if you want to keep up. Come on, we'll show you." David nodded, heart racing slightly. He had imagined farm life as gentle and quiet, maybe with some gardening and occasional chores. What he hadn't expected was how much there was to do before breakfast. Their first stop was the chicken coop. Margaret showed him how to check the eggs, clean the coop, and make sure the chickens were healthy. David fumbled with the eggs at first, dropping one and causing a small panic among the birds. Margaret's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in warning.
"Careful," she said. "They don't like chaos."
Everything has its place, David nodded, wiping his hands on his pants and feeling a little embarrassed.
Ruth, standing nearby, tried to ease the tension.
"It's okay," she said.
"You'll get the hang of it. Just pay attention." Next, they moved to the goats. David had never been close to goats before, and he wasn't sure what to expect. But as soon as he approached, one of them butted him lightly, knocking his hat to the ground. He stumbled back, laughing nervously, while Ruth shook her head.
"They test you," Ruth explained.
If you're not careful, they'll push back. But once they trust you, they're fine.
David spent the next hour feeding the goats, filling water troughs, and learning to identify which ones were friendly and which ones were more stubborn. It was harder than he thought, and he felt sweat dripping down his back despite the cool morning air. Lila then led him to the vegetable garden. "This is easier than animals," she said, "but it still has its own rules." She showed him rows of carrots, lettuce, and tomatoes, explaining how to water them properly and which plants needed special care. David listened carefully, trying not to make mistakes. He realized that every little detail mattered. Too much water, too little, picking the wrong leaves. Even the way you handled the soil could affect the plant's growth. By mid-morning, David was exhausted, but feeling a sense of accomplishment. He had learned more in a few hours than he thought possible. But then Margaret called him over to the barn, where a few cows were waiting. "Time for the big job," she said. David's stomach tightened. He had seen cows before, but never up close, and the idea of taking care of them alone made him nervous. Margaret patiently explained how to feed them, check their health, and clean their area. David tried to follow her instructions, but one cow nudged him unexpectedly, causing him to stumble backward into a pile of hay. Margaret raised an eyebrow, clearly amused but silent. "You'll learn," she said simply. Lunch was a brief respite, taken on the porch with simple bread, cheese, and fresh vegetables. David ate quickly, too tired to notice the sun climbing high in the sky. The women watched him carefully, occasionally exchanging glances, as if evaluating whether he was truly cut out for life on the farm. After lunch, they introduced him to another set of rules, this time about the land itself. Margaret took him on a walk through the far fields, pointing out areas that needed attention, hidden water sources, and places where the soil was weak. David listened carefully, trying to remember everything. He realized quickly that this was more than just farming. It was understanding the land, its moods, and its needs.
City people think it's just planting seeds and hoping for rain, Margaret said. It's not.
The land talks to you if you listen. David nodded, realizing he had never truly listened to nature before. Every rustling tree, chirping bird, and trickling stream seemed more alive than he had ever noticed. The women walked with confidence, almost as if they were part of the land itself. As the afternoon wore on, David began to notice small quirks about the women. Margaret was strict but fair. Ruth was nurturing with a hint of mischief, and Lila had a quiet patience that made her seem almost invisible until she spoke. They worked as a team, moving seamlessly around the farm, while David stumbled behind, learning and trying not to slow them down. Despite his exhaustion, he felt a strange sense of joy. He was learning skills he had never imagined needing: how to milk a cow, how to weed the garden without harming plants, how to anticipate an animal's mood. He was becoming part of the farm, little by little. One of the most surprising things was how the women treated him. They were strict and demanding, yes, but they were also willing to teach, to correct mistakes without anger, and to encourage him when he succeeded. David realized that this was a rare kind of mentorship, the kind that pushed you to your limits but also made you feel capable.
By late afternoon, the farm seemed to take on a rhythm, and David began to understand his place within it.
The animals were fed, the plants were tended, and the land was beginning to feel like home. He even managed to carry a full bucket of water without spilling it, a small victory, but one that made him feel proud. Back, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting a golden glow across the fields, the women gathered together near the barn. David stood nearby, feeling like a small child being watched over by giants, though not frightening ones, just immensely capable and slightly intimidating. Brask.
Margaret turned to him. "You did well today," she said.
But remember, this is just the beginning. Tomorrow we'll start with the animals again, and then there are fences to check and repairs to make. It never stops, and it never gets easier. You'll have to keep learning. Breaths. David nodded, a little overwhelmed, but determined. "I can do it," he said. "I want to do it." Ruth smiled, clearly approving. "Good, that's the attitude we like."
Lila added quietly, "And don't forget, it's not just work."
You'll need to learn how to live here too. Respect the land, the animals, and us.
If you can do that, you'll be fine. David laughed nervously.
I think I can manage that. I hope I can manage that.
As he headed back to the house for the evening, David reflected on the day. The farm was enormous, the women were larger-than-life personalities, and the work was endless. But there was something magical about it too. A sense of purpose, connection, and challenge that he had never experienced in the city. That night, as he lay in bed listening to the sounds of the farm, the rustle of trees, the distant call of an owl, the soft lowing of cows, he realized that life here would change him. It would push him, challenge him, and teach him things he had never imagined. And somehow, he felt ready. For the first time, he understood that farming was not just about growing food or maintaining a property. It was about living in harmony with the land, understanding its moods, respecting its rules, and learning to coexist with those who already knew them. The three women were his guides, and though they were strict and sometimes intimidating, they were also patient teachers. David closed his eyes, feeling both exhausted and exhilarated. He had survived his first full day on the farm, and he knew that many more challenges awaited him. But he also knew that he had taken the first step toward becoming part of something bigger than himself. A farm, a land, and a way of life that was wild, beautiful, and completely different from anything he had known before. And for the first time in his life, he felt that he belonged somewhere that demanded everything from him. yet gave back far more in return. The next morning, David woke up before the sun. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, and the crisp air smelled of earth and dew. He felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. Rasp. Today, Margaret had said, would be a real test. That sounded serious, and David had no idea what it might involve. He stepped outside, stretching his arms and taking in the quiet morning. The farm was alive with movement. The chickens were clucking loudly, the goats were bleating for breakfast, and the cows were already wandering toward the barn. But there was also a calmness to the morning, a rhythm that he was slowly starting to understand. Margaret, Ruth, and Lila were already waiting near the barn, holding buckets and tools. Margaret's expression was serious but not unkind. "Good morning, David. Today we're going to see how well you handle unexpected problems." Farming isn't just about routine. Sometimes things happen that you can't control. David nodded, feeling a flutter of anxiety. "I'll do my best," he said. Lila handed him a small notebook. "Take notes. Pay attention. You might need them later." David glanced at the pages filled with reminders, measurements, and diagrams of the farm. He realized that being a farmer was about more than just doing chores. It was about thinking ahead, solving problems, and noticing things before they became bigger issues. Their first task was the pond. Overnight heavy rain had caused some flooding near the edges. The ducks and geese seemed fine, but the water had overflowed onto a small path leading to the garden. Lila led David to the area and pointed to the muddy trail. "See this?" she asked. "If it's not fixed, the vegetables could be damaged and the path will be ruined. You'll need to redirect the water." David knelt down, examining the puddles. He had never dealt with anything like this before. He thought of digging small trenches or building a tiny barrier. But the women were already demonstrating how to use sandbags and boards to redirect the flow. David followed their instructions, fumbling at first but gradually getting the hang of it. By the time they finished, the water had been redirected, and the path was safe again. Breath. David felt a small spark of pride. It wasn't just about lifting buckets or feeding animals. It was about thinking and acting quickly. Next, Margaret led him to the barn. One of the cows, a large brown one named Hazel, seemed restless. She was pawing the ground and lowing loudly. Margaret's brow furrowed. "Hazel isn't happy," she said. "She must be sick or uncomfortable." "You need to check her carefully." David felt a wave of panic. He had never examined a cow so closely before. Margaret guided him, showing how to check for signs of illness, temperature, appetite, and behavior. David approached Hazel slowly, gently touching her coat and listening to her breathing. Ruth handed him a thermometer and showed him how to use it safely. After a few tense minutes, David realized that Hazel was fine. Just restless because the barn door had shifted slightly during the storm. Margaret nodded approvingly.
Good job noticing that, she said. It's not always obvious, and it can be easy to panic.
But staying calm and observing carefully makes all the difference. Relieved, David moved to the next task. Fence repair. A section of the fence along the far field had been damaged in the storm. Lila demonstrated how to lift the wooden posts, secure them with wire, and make sure the barrier was strong enough to keep the goats and cows in. David tried lifting a post, struggling against its weight, while Ruth coached him on proper technique. It took nearly 2 hours, sweat dripping from his forehead, before the fence was fully repaired. David was exhausted but felt a growing confidence. Each task he completed was a small victory, and the women's quiet approval fueled his determination. After a brief lunch, Margaret told David it was time for the biggest challenge of the day, checking the far field. A fallen tree had blocked part of the path, and some of the crops might have been damaged. David groaned inwardly. Walking across the uneven, muddy field in the afternoon sun sounded exhausting. As they reached the edge of the field, Margaret handed him a saw.
You'll need this, she said.
The tree isn't large, but you'll have to cut it carefully. David examined the tree. It wasn't huge, but it was heavy and awkward, with branches sticking out in all directions. Despising his death, he tried to start cutting, but the saw slipped several times, leaving small scratches on his hands. Margaret and Ruth guided him patiently, demonstrating the proper way to angle the blade and use his body weight. It took over an hour, but finally the tree was reduced to manageable pieces. David stacked the logs neatly to the side, feeling a sense of accomplishment he had never felt in the city. He was tired, sunburned, and covered in dirt. But he had done something tangible, something that mattered. While catching his breath, David realized he was learning more than just farm skills. First, he was learning patience, observation, and problem-solving. Each challenge was teaching him not just how to work, but how to think differently, to anticipate, adapt, and stay calm under pressure. As the day wore on, the women led him to smaller, more detailed tasks, cleaning the goat stalls, repairing tools, and organizing the storage shed. David found himself slipping into a rhythm. The work was hard, but it was satisfying in a way his city jobs had never been. By late afternoon, dark clouds gathered in the sky, hinting at another storm. Breaking. Margaret, Ruth, and Lila glanced at each other knowingly. "Looks like we'll get another test," Margaret said. David looked up nervously. "Another!" Ruth laughed softly. "Not a test exactly. Just life on the farm." As the first drops of rain began to fall, the women showed him how to secure the animals, protect the crops, and cover the tools. David ran from one task to another, drenched but determined. He realized that storms weren't just natural events. They were lessons in preparation, patience, and teamwork. By evening, the rain had stopped, leaving the farm sparkling and fresh. David was soaked and muddy, but he felt triumphant. He had faced the day's challenges, learned new skills, and survived his first real test. More importantly, he had begun to earn the women's trust. As they gathered inside the house, drying off and enjoying warm drinks, Margaret spoke. Breaths. "Today was tough, but you did well. You stayed calm, observed carefully, and followed instructions."
"That's what matters." David smiled, exhausted but proud.
"Thanks. I couldn't have done it without your guidance." Lila nodded. "And tomorrow, there will be more challenges. Farming doesn't stop, but you're learning quickly."
David realized that life on the farm was nothing like he had imagined.
It was harder, yes, but also more rewarding. Each task, each challenge, each moment of confusion or exhaustion was teaching him something valuable. As he lay in bed that night, listening to the soft patter of leftover rain on the roof, David reflected on the day. He had faced his first real crisis on the farm, the storm, the animals, the fallen tree, and survived. More than that, he had discovered that he was capable of more than he had ever imagined. The women had been strict and demanding, yes, but also patient, guiding him through every step. Margaret's seriousness, Ruth's humor, and Lila's quiet patience had created a balance that helped him learn and grow. He understood now that life on the farm wasn't just about work. It was about discipline, observation, and harmony with the land and its caretakers. David drifted off to sleep, feeling tired but fulfilled. He knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons, and new opportunities to prove himself. But he also knew something important. He was no longer just a visitor on the farm. He was becoming part of it. And slowly, Day by day, he was learning what it meant to live in harmony with the land and the women who already called it home. The first storm had tested him, and he had passed. The farm was tough, unpredictable, and sometimes exhausting, but it was also alive, beautiful, and full of lessons waiting to be learned. David felt ready for whatever came next. The next morning, David woke up to a soft golden light spilling across the fields. The air smelled clean, fresh, and alive, carrying the faint scent of damp earth from last night's rain. He had been sleeping well, deeply, without the city's constant noise to interrupt him. For the first time, he felt that the farm might really be his home. As he stepped outside, he saw the three women already working, moving with the same confidence and rhythm he had begun to admire. Margaret was organizing hay bales near the barn, Ruth was checking the goats, and Lila was tending to the vegetable garden. David paused for a moment, feeling a sense of calm. He realized that life on the farm had a flow, a rhythm, and he was slowly beginning to fit into it. "Good morning," Margaret said, noticing him. Her voice carried the same calm authority, but this time there was a hint of warmth. "Morning," David replied, smiling. He had learned to greet her with respect and confidence, just as she expected. Today they had planned something special. Margaret had told him that the final step in learning the farm's ways wasn't just about work. It was about understanding the land, the animals, and the people who lived there. They began by walking through the far fields, which had recovered beautifully from yesterday's storm. David noticed how much he could read the land now, where the soil was soft, where the plants needed water, and even where the animals might wander if left unchecked. It was as if the farm had become a map in his mind, each area holding its own rules and stories. Margaret stopped near the edge of the forest that bordered the property. "These woods are part of the farm too," she said. "We respect them, and they respect us. You'll need to understand them if you want to live here fully." David listened carefully as Margaret explained which plants were useful, which berries were safe, and which areas were best left alone. Breath. He followed closely, learning to recognize the subtle signs of the environment. The way the leaves moved in the wind, the sound of birds in the trees, even the smell of the soil. Ruth led him next to the animals, but "They're part of the family now," she said. "You can't just feed them and forget them. You have to know them, understand them, and sometimes even anticipate what they need." David spent the morning with the cows and goats, noticing details he had overlooked before, the way Hazel shifted her weight when she wanted attention, or how one of the goats liked to nibble gently on his sleeve when it was hungry, and how the chickens had their own pecking order that he needed to respect.
He realized that every creature on the farm had its personality, and that patience and observation were more important than brute effort. By midday, David was beginning to feel a sense of pride.
He had learned so much, and the women were no longer distant guides. They were his teachers, and in some ways, his friends. They stopped for lunch on the porch, sharing bread, cheese, and vegetables from the garden. David noticed how much he had adapted already. He could carry full buckets, recognize the animals' moods, and even move around the barn without tripping over tools or bumping into obstacles. After lunch, Lila took him to a small workshop she had created near the house. "Farming isn't just about strength," she said. Sometimes it's about creativity, problem-solving, and thinking ahead." She showed David how to repair broken tools, mend fences with care, and even make small improvements around the property. David listened intently, realizing that part of being a successful farmer was not just maintaining the farm, but improving it and making it your own. The afternoon passed quickly, with David learning, practicing, and sometimes fumbling, but each mistake taught him something new. By the time the sun began to lower in the sky, he was tired but glowing with accomplishment. Margaret called him over. "It's time for your final lesson," she said. You've learned the routines, handled the animals, repaired fences, and faced the storms, but the last lesson is about understanding what it means to live here fully. David followed her to the pond. The water was calm now, reflecting the sky and the surrounding trees. Ducks swam lazily, and the geese wandered along the shore. Margaret gestured for him to sit beside her. To live on this farm, she said quietly, you have to see it as more than land or animals. You have to see it as a whole life. Everything is connected: the soil, the water, the plants, the animals, and us. You are part of it now, and it will be part of you. That's what we wanted you to learn. David listened, feeling a deep sense of understanding. He realized that the farm had changed him. He was more patient, more observant, and more confident than he had ever been. He had learned to solve problems, face challenges, and respect the world around him. And most importantly, he had learned to work with others, even those who seemed intimidating at first. Ruth joined them, carrying a small basket of fresh eggs.
You've done well, she said, smiling.
You've earned your place here. Lila sat quietly watching the pond. And remember, she said softly, life on the farm isn't just about work.
It's about harmony, balance.
Knowing when to act and when to wait. You understand that now. Breath. David nodded, feeling a warm sense of pride. He had arrived on this farm as an outsider, nervous and unsure. Now he felt like he belonged. He had learned not just the skills of farming, but the values that made it meaningful: patience, respect, observation, and care. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the fields. The sky was painted in brilliant oranges and purples, and the farm glowed in the warm light. David looked around at the three women, realizing how much they had taught him, not just about farming, but about life. Margaret stood and stretched, looking out across the land. Tomorrow, she said, we'll start again. There will always be more to do, more to learn, more challenges. But you're ready. You proved that. David smiled, feeling a sense of completion. Breaths. He knew the farm would never be easy, but it was full of lessons, rewards, and beauty. He had been tested, guided, and challenged, and he had grown stronger, wiser, and more confident. As evening turned to night, the farm was quiet except for the soft sounds of animals settling in for the night. David walked to the porch, looking out at the fields and forests. He felt a deep connection to the land, to the animals, and to the women who had taught him so much.
For the first time in his life, David felt a sense of true belonging.
He was part of something larger than himself, a rhythm of life that demanded respect, care, and attention. And in return, it gave him purpose, knowledge, and a sense of accomplishment he had never experienced before. He realized that the three women, who had seemed intimidating and overwhelming at first, were now his mentors and friends. They had taught him not just how to survive on the farm, but how to thrive, adapt, and belong. As he finally went to bed that night, David felt a sense of peace he had never known. He had faced challenges, learned hard lessons, and grown in ways he had never imagined. And he knew that life on the farm, with its work, its rhythms, and its lessons, would continue to shape him, guiding him toward a future full of growth, adventure, and connection. David drifted off to sleep, hearing the soft sounds of the farm around him, the rustle of leaves, the distant calls of animals, and the quiet presence of the three women who had become his teachers and companions. He was ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. The farm had become home, and David had finally become part of it.